Today, we're going to be covering not leafy greens. So often when we think about indoor farming and vertical farming and hydroponics, we think about lettuce and cut herbs. And so we've got 3 lovely panelists here today who are doing things outside of that spectrum. Very excited to hear their perspective. So I'm going to let those chaps kind of give their bio for all of us. Go ahead, guys.
I guess I'm going to volunteer.
Yep, I'm going to volunteer Jonas. Go ahead.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonas. I am the CEO and co-founder of We Are the New Farmers. We're also an indoor farming company, but instead of leafy greens, we focus all of our efforts on the mighty microalgae. Microalgae, just like spirulina, are in the same family as kelp or nori or other types of seaweeds, just much, much smaller. And they are very, very fascinating machines that are super efficient in turning carbon into building blocks of life. And that's what we do here in our indoor facility in Brooklyn, New York.
I can go next. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all for inviting me. I am Andrew Carter. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Smallhold. We are based in New York, but we have facilities in New York, Texas, and Los Angeles now, and we grow specialty mushrooms that you can buy in grocery stores. We have our own proprietary patented control systems and a pretty complex supply chain, but we grow some beautiful mushrooms that you can find in compostable cardboard clamshells or even grown on site in some certain locations. My background's actually in leafy greens. I've grown way more leafy greens than I've grown mushrooms. I had a lot of experience in various indoor farms and greenhouses. And so, definitely excited to talk about why I kind of made the shift into the fungal universe.
And the fungus is a universe.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm clipping a little bit. Happy to jump in for the next slide. Yeah, cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Peters. I'm CEO of DryGro. We're an AgTech company focusing on a novel protein ingredient called water lentils, also known as duckweed or lemna, and we're producing them in closed or semi-closed environments. One of the cool things about water lentils is that they grow very quickly and they're very high in protein. And so we started experimenting with this crop at Oxford University. And then over the last few years, we've been building larger and larger closed production systems for this novel ingredient. We currently have operations in the UK and in Kenya, where I currently am. So apologies for the connection issues. The data is traveling a very long way to your ears and eyes. Our beachhead market's focused on an extractable protein from this crop called rubisco, which can act as sort of a vegan or vegetarian egg white alternative in plant-based meats or ice creams or frostings or things like that. Really excited to be on the panel and great to see my fellow panelists here as well.
Yeah, guys, welcome. I'm just going to ask one more kind of bio question before we get the ball rolling. What's your local connection to like New York or the Northeast?
I can start. I grew up in California, but I've lived in New York since 2009. I was actually born in New York, and so technically speaking, I'm from here. But our company is based here. We started here. I used to work on a bunch of different projects and was one of the first people to help start the New York Ag Collective as well. And so I've definitely been trying to grow food in New York City and Brooklyn for a really long time. Really excited that it's becoming as sophisticated and as big as it's become over the last few years.
Yeah, well, I live in New York today. I'm originally from Germany though, and I came to New York in 2016. And the New York City AgTech Week was really my my stepping stone into the world of indoor farming. I don't have a background in agriculture at all. Like I'm an engineer by trade. And when I came to New York, I was deeply fascinated by the world of indoor farming, vertical farming. Remember some of the big players today in the industry were just starting to make the first headlines. And I remember my first AgTech Week as being kind of this super fascinating week where I was able to really learn so much about the different ways, find my entrance into the industry, and now, well over 6 years later, running my own indoor farming company. I don't think it would have been possible without this first exposure to the industry and the scene here in New York.
And on my side, no direct connection to New York, originally from Vancouver up in Canada on the West Coast, but I was connected into Dan Nelson, who I think is organizing part of the event. And we'd had long conversations on indoor farming. And so I think that was the connection.
So I'm hearing kind of a mix of backgrounds. You've got, man, I never did this until I found this conference, and I actually used to do leafy greens, and now I do mushrooms. When you guys think about the specific, components that you guys are creating, the products that you're giving to your market, what is the way that you feel like we heard so many people today talk about how connected they are to what they're producing and like their kind of connection with their clients? Kind of just give us a little bit of feel for what got you into what you specifically do and like why you feel like it's great.
You start. I'll start, sure. I mean, I've always been really interested in mushrooms. The fungal kingdom or queendom, however you want to define it, is vast and not really understood very well by at least Western society. And I found that to be just completely fascinating. When I was in college, I studied ecological design and bioremediation, which was like kind of learning how to use plants and fungi to filter out waste streams. And at that point was when Paul Stamets and like mycelium running came out. And so it was like very popular in my university. And then when I graduated, I couldn't find any work doing that. And so I got into this indoor ag space doing leafy greens. Throughout the years, I've been, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of this, like I'm very excited about leafy greens. I don't think it's either or. I think that there is a world where we grow these kinds of crops in indoors. It's very important, but I knew that I wanted to start something, and I could see that the leafy green space was very crowded, and there's a lot of money, and it's kind of frothy. There's just a lot of competition, at least in brand. I don't know if everyone is out in all of the stores or anything, but I knew that I would have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to go and really truly compete to some of these companies. I kind of thought that mushrooms were generally really exciting, but what I got generally excited about with growing indoors was more about controlled environments. I think that like we have a lot of issues with climate change where the biology and evolution isn't really catching up with how fast our climate is changing. And so we need to figure out how to grow crops in controlled environments for people to survive in the future, whether that's in 2 years, in 200 years, in 2000 years, I don't know. But that's where I always got excited. And I found mushrooms to be this kind of stepping stone from leafy greens that I thought would be, originally I thought it was going to be very similar. I couldn't have been more incorrect. I had to really relearn everything about growing indoors to grow mushrooms. But I just kind of went down the rabbit hole and then just got completely obsessed with mushrooms, as some people do. I'm sure some people on this list, or some people even in this panel are obsessed with mushrooms. But it tends to happen to people who grow them. Really quickly learned that there is this just massive trend around it. I'm sure a lot of people see it. It really emerged over the last couple of years, but it was happening 4 or 5 years ago. More and more people are trying to eat less meat. They're trying to eat local food. They're trying to eat carbon-friendly food. And mushrooms, but especially smallhold mushrooms, answer a lot of those. And so we've just been growing and growing, and I couldn't be more happy to do that and bring it to the shelves at grocery stores all over the place.
Andrew, great call out and bringing that back to the ag tech kind of topic today. And I also like that kind of hint at what we're going to talk about in a bit, which is this mental switch from tonnage, a very classic traditional ag, like greens perspective, to nutrient density. So Jonas, Sean, like how do you kind of feel about those topics when you think about, what you're hype about that you're growing?
Yeah, I can seamlessly continue with this because I feel like Andrew and I think very much alike in some of these topics, and only that my fascination is more in a separate kingdom, the kingdom of algae, rather than the kingdom of mushrooms. And when I started out, I was faced with a similar world, basically, where we were all very fascinated by the possibilities of indoor farming and leafy greens. However, it was also a very crowded space, and so there were only 2 kingdoms left, and Andrew was already growing mushrooms in a small container back in the days in Williamsburg, so didn't want to go that way, so I only had 1 kingdom left, and that was algae. Not quite the way we got there, but algae are in a similar way a crop that is extremely underutilized by humans when it comes to food, and in the same breath, I could say it's one of the most sustainable crops that we have. They grow extremely fast. They barely need any resources, and the bottleneck in the algae industry has been always to find ways to have people consume it, have it as simple as possible for people to like algae and to incorporate it into everyday diets. Even though there's centuries, if not like, I think the first traces of algae consumption go back 9,000 BC. So there's a long history of algae as a food source, and yet it hasn't really transcended into at least Western worlds and Western cuisines. And that's kind of the mission that we're on, because the type of algae that we grow, it's just a phenomenal impact on the environment. My starting point was understanding all the shortcomings that our existing food system has, and I don't think I understood all of them yet, but there are so many areas to it, and I wanted to find something that has the potential to actually systemically improve upon the way we grow food, from the amount of nutrition that we get for food, from the amount of water that we use when we grow, the land usage, the access to food, the carbon, which is our starting point of it all, the most important thing that's dearest to my heart, the carbon impact of the food that we grow. And algae is uniquely positioned in that, and it was also in a way a blank canvas, because today the majority of algae and microalgae that's consumed is a powder. It's a dried supplement product that's sitting in a very different aisle than fresh produce that most people are growing here. I didn't see it as a food, and most people didn't see it as a food. So we really tried to rethink the entire process from the ground up when it comes to algae production. How do we create products that are grown close to where people live, with a better nutritional profile, with a better culinary profile, something that's fresh and perishable, like in a world that customers actually want, rather than something that's what people eat because they have to, because the doctor tells them it's very nutritious. And that's my fascination with it. And the longer the journey goes on, the more I learn about this fascinating world of algae and microalgae in particular, and then like the thousands of organisms that are out there. You were saying, Andrew, earlier that the trend of mushrooms now like bloomed in the last couple of years, and I see that happening now in the very early stages in algae, where people for the first time look left and right and be like, wait a moment, there are like thousands of strains of algae and we haven't even explored 1% of what's out there. Let's see what we can do with that. And I really see that as the starting point of a evolution, if not a revolution, of like the sourcing of materials that we do based off of microorganisms.
Jonas, when you get your algae trend, you're gonna have so much fun with the blooming puns.
Thanks for that. At risk of having a boring panel where there's no conflict, I have to concur with Andrew and Jonas, especially Jonas, your description of a change in food systems and having to rebuild a new food system in the context that we're facing over the next century and beyond. That was really my entry point as well. Growing up, my summer job and then eventually my job through undergrad was cooking in a casual fine dining restaurant. And so that was sort of my first experience of food every day and all of the waste that goes alongside that. But then when I was doing my master's, I really got into commodity economics and the future of food. So really understanding from mass aggregate level, the sheer increase in production volume that's required over the course of the next century, adding 2 billion people, the planet, most of those people being in emerging markets where people are consuming more calories per capita, and the impact of all of that on food systems in the context of climate change. And so to the subject matter of the topic today, looking beyond leafy greens are great, but I think traditional vertical farming is done for the grocery store produce shelves, similar to what Starbucks had done to coffee. It's created a super premium, really cool product that a lot of people really love, myself included, but I don't think that's going to solve the kind of food system challenges that we face ahead. And so I think it's algae and mushrooms and protein crops and other carb crops that are going to have to rise to meet that challenge. That means rethinking what it means to do closed environment or vertical farming. So that's why I'm really excited to speak with others who are interested in these subjects today, and some of the audience who might have questions on that subject.
Speaking of which, great call out, Sean. Audience, if you want to jump into the chat or ask a question, we'll be kind of getting to that both during the panel and at the end. But given that we might want a little bit of conflict or to spice stuff up, I heard in some of what you guys were saying, Andrew, you mentioned you had to relearn everything from being a leafy greens grower to growing mushrooms. And, Jonas, it sounds like you're trying to, create your own demand for the product that you care so passionately about. So maybe we can dive into some of the challenges that you faced in your respective industries and water, lentils, and kind of where's the tricky parts been, what's gone super smoothly.
I can give it a start this time, so Andrew doesn't have to start every single time. Yeah, you're right. What we do is completely new. We're basically creating an entirely new category of food that hasn't been out there before, and that comes with enormous challenges. It comes with challenges internally, just understanding where you actually want to position this product. How do you want to communicate the value of this product? What are the use cases of the product, to simplify that for people as much as possible. But then following that, once you figured out how it would look like, how do you actually bring this to a wider audience? It's not like people suddenly wake up in the morning and be like, oh my God, I need to eat fresh spirulina. I wish that would be the case. Unfortunately, it's not the case. We have to do a lot of education. We have to do a lot of partnerships with all kinds of culinary partners, with nutrition partners, with other brands, to really get people to understand what this product does to them, and what kind of problem it can solve in everyday life for the individual. And that is obviously an enormous challenge. It's not unique to us. I think that is something that a lot of ingredient manufacturers and producers face. But it's something that we get better at every single day. And when you notice that you're no longer alone, when you notice that other people working in similar spaces, it gets easier. When we got started, almost 5 years ago, typical run-of-the-mill newspaper articles, Healthline or whatever, would be like, what is spirulina? Well, it comes in 2 different forms. It comes as powder or as a pill. And then they talk about all the health benefits. And today, all these articles start with, well, what is spirulina? Well, it comes in 3 different ways. It comes as powder, as pill, and as a fresh ingredient. And that is such a major success already that we basically created this new category for people to see and explore this type of product. But it's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that. I mean, I definitely agree the education piece is was historically probably the biggest challenge for us in the beginning. It's a lot easier now. I mean, it was funny. It's we were growing in a shipping container in Williamsburg, and, people would be like, a lot of people would ask me why I'm doing this rather than growing leafy greens. That was probably the first question. But then, a lot of people didn't know all of the diversity of the different varieties that can be out there. Fancy restaurants and fancy grocery stores, sure, might be able to do that. But most consumers weren't familiar with lion's mane or sometimes maitake, these mushrooms that a lot of people are familiar with now. And so we did a lot of work on just community building. And that's a fancy term for literally just me and Adam, my co-founder, my old friend, just doing random stuff on Instagram. But it ended up building a community around us, which then created a lot of people who help educate other people. And that is definitely one of the main things that helped us succeed in the beginning, and it's something that we're trying to continue as we grow. I mean, with mushrooms, as well as I think leafy greens have the same sort of issue. Like Smallhold does this, we call it distributed farming, but we're not building like a gigantic centralized facility. Some of our facilities are pretty big, like 30 to 40,000 square feet, but not like 200, 300,000 square feet facilities. The technology that exists and the supply chain and everything that exists for mushroom growing is for either that kind of facility or like someone growing in their closet. And so when you're trying to do something in between, you're really kind of creating something from scratch. I think it's the same thing with any kind of agriculture. It's the same thing with greenhouse production. It's the same thing with a lot of hydroponics, same thing with outdoor production. There's not a whole lot of in between. It's like DIY or like massive scale. And so we had to create a bunch of we had to engineer a bunch of stuff. We have like patented technology that we spent years trying to develop, which seems kind of crazy. And hopefully in 5 or 10 years, that's not what needs to happen. But we found ourselves in the position where that was what needed to happen for us to succeed. And so that was definitely difficult to manage. But I guess like some of Smallhold, the reason why we even do things the way we do things is because we didn't have any space. We were in New York City. We started in a shipping container. And if anyone Googles Smallhold, you'll probably find like for the first, majority of our existence, we did these installations inside grocery stores and restaurants. So if you go to Whole Foods in Guanas or Central Markets in Texas, they're growing their mushrooms right in the grocery store, and you can harvest them and put them on the shelf. It's really cool stuff. We're going to continue to do that. But like that was definitely it was because we didn't have a farm. We didn't have any money to like get a huge warehouse to grow mushrooms in. We just convinced a bunch of restaurants and grocery stores to let us grow on site with them. And then we evolved from there. And it turns out that a lot of people want that. Like I'm excited about the potential of that, but it was like, our concept was very much like a symptom of our situation or something, however you want to define that. But that is very much an urban thing. I think that if we were doing this out in Pennsylvania, like most other mushroom growers are doing it, we would probably have approached it in a different way. And I don't know if we would be as successful or if we'd be doing the same thing. And so I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it doesn't change that it was extremely difficult.
Yeah, the constraints, it sounds like really bred creativity for you guys. And I know I've seen some of your mushroom installations in bars and they're like backlit really beautifully. And it kind of like goes to what you were saying earlier, which I really liked about how do you build that community, right? Like how do you get in front of your end customer, which is really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we think that with mushrooms, I think it's with anything, if you see it, then you have this like 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 chance of like converting someone to be obsessed with mushrooms. And so we just try to get the imagery out there. We get like cool artist friends to like take photos or make content. And it's just about like exposing people to fungus, and hopefully they try to integrate it into their lifestyles in a meaningful way.
That's already the quote of the day for me. You're trying to expose people to fungus.
In a positive.
I did mentally picture like a scary horror movie where like the fungus comes and invades.
Yeah.
Folks, I'm sorry, this may clip because I was cutting in and out there for a second. I've tried to switch networks again. But Andrew, I caught the part where you were talking about the do-it-yourself at-home equipment versus the industrial equipment and having to invent a lot of that industrial equipment. And it's a very similar story on our side. We started with this sort of broad challenge of, okay, we have this crop that grows very quickly and has very high protein levels. Could this be a replacement for current protein systems? And if so, what would that look like? What would that kind of mass industrial scale look like? And that hasn't really been done very much yet. Lots of academic literature about small scale production and some off the shelf equipment to do that. But if you're trying to design and build industrial scale production systems, that comes through trial and error. And so I think the only way we were able to build our current facility was through a lot of support from plant scientists and universities across Europe. We launched our first demo site back in 2018. And then in 2020, we launched our second generation facility, which is about 5 hectares footprint. And we've been operating that facility for about 16 months now, 17 months now. So early results there are amazing. It's been really cool to see product come off so consistently, but that's only come through an almost obsessive data management. And a lot of the things on the data side we've learned from the vertical farming industry and the work out of MIT.
What's some of the tech that you guys, I really like that data call out that you kind of borrowed or modified? It sounds like, you know, it's coming from a mix of, I built it myself and that was really hard and took years. I borrowed this and modified it. And particularly I'm interested, you know, Andrew did a really good job of explaining how he used Artistic Friends and Instagram and public installations to kind of grow interest in community. You know, Sean and Jonas, like when you guys are growing water lentils and algae, like how do you kind of get in front of that consumer? It's two very separate questions, but I'll do the, how do you get in front of your consumer to Jonas and Sean, and then maybe we can get back into the equipment.
Sure, maybe I'll jump in first and then tag off to Jonas. Yeah, I think the customer side is a little different because we're B2B and we're focused on sort of mass ingredient supply. But to do that, we need to produce consistently. And that's the challenge. If you produced in an open air environment, or if you didn't understand the conditions in which you're growing, you're going to get very variable product. And that doesn't work when you're trying to produce for mass industrial scale. And so for us, it really became a question of, okay, what variables will allow us to manage this system well enough to gain that kind of consistency? And that, again, was through trial and error. So we were able to benefit through a lot of off-the-shelf tech that hadn't been used in these kind of exact conditions before. So that kind of testing different sensors, testing different data management systems, all of that was the challenge. Fortunately, we applied for a grant with the European Space Agency, and through that support and some third-party support through that funding, we were able to get sort of the initial baseline tech in place, and it's sort of matured from there.
Okay, very different topic. How do we get in front of customers? For us, it's interesting because I think what differentiates us from pretty much both of you, but also from a lot of the other like panelists here during the entire AgTech week is that we are a D2C company. We're like completely vertically integrated. We farm, but we also operate an online shop with a D2C brand. And while my heart is like algae can be so much, and there's so many stories to tell and like so many partnerships, it forces you to develop a very specific brand so you actually stand out in the online acquisition channels that you're going for. We're working a lot with athletes and fitness influencers to target specific groups of customers that are interested in enhancing their performance. We're working a lot with nutritionists that like advise on specific diets. We like to do a lot of in-person stuff. We still do a lot of farmers markets and go into that area. And then we try to do as much as possible from what's considered a traditional D2C playbook, from the, your search engine optimization tactics to your email marketing to paid marketing and acquisition strategies and paid partnerships. That is all a bit detached from the traditional AgTech world. I don't think a lot of the traditional agriculture players think about it that way. But for us, it's extremely crucial because that's the way we grow our brand and our business. Going back all the way from the beginning, like it was core to our strategy. Like we knew if we wouldn't be doing that, like we needed to have an authentic brand. We needed to be able to tell the story directly to the end consumer. Otherwise, we would have just drifted into some form of commodity space where your line item in like on someone's product that no one's going to recognize, and no one's going to be willing to pay the value, the price for the product that it's worth. And so for us, it was key from the get-go that we needed to be that focused and then branch out as we grow into more adjacent areas. And now we're starting for the first time to work with in a B2B channel, like with different food manufacturers, with juice shops, with smoothie shops. But they work with us because they know us already. They've seen our brand, and in this very specific subsegment that we're operating in, we create that pull. So yeah, that is the relatively short answer to how we actually like try to acquire customers and continue to grow.
And I want to pull out something that you referenced, Jonas. So when I mentally pictured your products, right? Like Jonas, I picture like a container with fresh spirulina, and I probably picture like putting it in a smoothie. Andrew, right? Plate of mushrooms, beautiful, lots of umami. Sean, like kind of, you know, for the webinar audience, it's like maybe not as familiar with water lentils and your product, like kind of give us some of those images of, you know, if we're going to eat this, right? And once it goes through your B2B process, like how does it show up on the plate? How does it show up in our lives?
Yeah, for sure. So when we produce it fresh, water lentils are basically very tiny green dots. They sort of look like miniature lily pads. You could fit maybe 50 of them on your fingertip. They're very, very small. But when we process them, we extract a protein called rubisco. And that protein happens to be in all leafy greens, but it's very difficult to extract from most crops. With our crop, we have a lot of rubisco in the crop. And so we have sort of a unique extraction case there. So many companies are very familiar with rubisco if they're developing food products, but the general public usually isn't because there hasn't been a kind of industrial supply that's allowed it to be widely incorporated yet. So that's sort of a beachhead market that we've been focusing on. And the end products developed from that would be things like, right now in plant-based meats, the binding agent is usually potato protein or something called methylcellulose. And there are challenges with both of those ingredients. So rubisco could really fit in spaces like that as sort of like a next generation ingredient for plant-based meats. Similarly, you need an emulsifier for things like frostings or ice creams or all kinds of products. And again, methylcellulose or potato protein are often the ingredients that are used. So we're looking at a few different use cases right now as we scale up. But that's sort of the beachhead we're focused on. Long run, you know, I'm very interested in the crop itself because I think if we're in a situation where we're going to need a very large amount of additional protein over the next century, we need food systems that are better than they are today. And in the last century, we got there through the Green Revolution. We don't have a Green Revolution in the cards yet, again, for this century. And that comes through concentrated research on potential industrial scale crops. So we see this beachhead as a way to drive interest in this particular ingredient that'll drive more capital, more research into production systems, economies of scale efficiencies and genetics that will drive down the cost basis and open up wider markets over time.
That's lovely. And so what I pulled from that is you're an important chemical kind of catalyst to something as delicious as ice cream to a component in like a vegan Beyond Beef type of patty on a burger. Hopefully one day those are our two kind of avenues that you guys are going down.
Yeah, and many other vegan and vegetarian products. That just seems to be the beachhead use case. But water lentils can be used as a protein ingredient in all kinds of things, from human food to pet food to animal food. It's just the cost basis issue that's the question today, and that only comes through market maturity and research. So we see this as the starting point, but in the long run, we're interested in rebuilding protein systems.
So one of the things that I was curious about that I heard in what you said, Sean, and I'm very curious how this shows up for Andrew and Jonas. Like, so you coined this protein rubisco from your product. How are you guys able to, like, what's the level of control that you have, right? This is AgTech week after all. What's the level of control that you have to actually up the nutrition density in the products that you're creating? Do we have any control?
Andrew, do you want to go first, or?
Did you say I would go first?
I was asking if you want to go first.
Oh, I'll go first. I can go first. So we have a lot of control. We spend a lot of time developing the control system that we use. It's called FarmLink. It's anyone at AgTech Week has probably listened to a pitch of any indoor ag company that talks about data, but we do a similar kind of thing, capturing hundreds of thousands of data points per day. We run pretty complicated climate recipes for each of the varieties that we grow. The starting point is always like the natural environment that they grow in, we're trying to imitate. And then we're always working on that and making it so it's more of a Smallhold recipe. We can grow a lot of mushrooms in a small amount of space, like a lot more per square foot in these facilities than you'd see in a leafy green kind of facility or anything else. Some of it has to do with the control system. Some of it has to do with just mushrooms in general, which we can talk about, like why leafy greens or whatever. But the control system allows us to do a lot of things, but I wouldn't say it gives us really control over the nutrition. With mushrooms, nutrition is kind of really guided by the genetics of the mushroom itself rather than the environment it's in. So mushrooms, for everyone as a primer, it's a kingdom, and so there's different mushrooms, different kinds of fungi grow in different ways. But the mushrooms that people grow for food usually, that people can grow, are called saprotrophic mushrooms. So they're digester mushrooms. I pause there because there are mushrooms that you'd forage. They're called mycorrhizal mushrooms. They're living in symbiosis, or like a relationship with a tree. That stuff's super cool. People don't really know how to grow those mushrooms, and so let's just not talk about them for now. The mushrooms that people do know how to grow are digesters, and so we feed them organic sawdust. Essentially, it's waste stream from the timber industry, and it's supplemented with oat bran and rye berries and a few other natural materials. We're a certified organic operation, but all of our substrates are made out of waste streams, and then the mycelium breaks it down kind of like your stomach would. It releases enzymes and creates its own energy through that process. And so in a way, that substrate can provide it nutrition, but honestly, like the mushrooms themselves can get similar nutrition from a lot of different types of substrate. They grow very fast, and so it's different than like with plants where they take a long time to develop and build. Where we really play in the nutrition game is how fresh the product is. Most mushrooms are shipped for thousands of miles. A lot of them come from overseas even. The food miles and the distance and the amount of time it takes from harvest to shelf to the plate, there's so much nutrient degradation that happens during decomposition that we know that by, we're literally like 5 miles away from some of the distribution centers we work with. And so we're way closer production and our products are grown way closer to the customer than any other type of mushroom. And so we can win on nutrition, but mainly because of freshness, if that makes any sense. But that is dictated by the technology and all the things we do. And so it all plays together, but it mostly has to do with trying to have a fresh product for consumers.
For algae, it looks very different. Algae with microalgae are extremely fast growing organisms. And the type of algae that we grow is actually 3.6 billion years old. Like that is like primordial soup type of old. And that means that the organism has adopted a lot to a lot of different environments and can basically survive and thrive as long as it has the base supply of nutrients and light and so on. What it also means is that it responds pretty quickly to all kinds of stressors or environmental changes. You change the amount of light that you give it. It has a different response in terms of the amount of chlorophyll, the amount of phycocyanin, which is a blue pigment typical present in algae. So you can stimulate that with the right amount of nutrients, with the right amount of conditions. You can stimulate the amount of protein that is existent in the algae, and most importantly, in most commercial farms, you typically just provide the base nutrients and the algae needs to grow. The NPKs, it's similar to plants. But the big value of algae and microalgae is in its micronutrients, the iron, the copper, the potassium, so all the minerals, the vitamins. And if that's not present in your initial mix, it's also not going to be present in the end. So we go extra lengths of ensuring that all those micronutrients are actually available, like making concoctions of iron that is available to the algae to grow, so it can really boost the iron content of our product. As a result, the iron levels in our product are significantly higher, and a lot of people seek out the product for that reason. I mean, iron deficiency is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies in the country. So from that perspective, it's super interesting because you can modulate it to a degree, and we're not even close to having full control over that. That is an extremely complex research topic, and there are plenty of research papers, and I know ExxonMobil has dumped billions of dollars into it to try to figure out how to up the lipid content to create biofuels. So we're not close to dumping billions on it, not even very close at all. But we do what we can. And then the second part is the freshness, and that's what Andrew was also talking about. And that's where it gets really interesting for us. And that's where our main differentiator is really, because typically these products that are in the market when it comes to microalgae, they're all powders. They've been dehydrated. They've been dehydrated with heat, which kills a bunch of the nutrients. You have no idea how old the products are that you buy on the shelf. The bioavailability of the powder forms is not that great. I mean, we've all been built to eat real food and not dry powders, and that's the reason why Andrew is selling mushrooms as mushrooms and not as mushroom powder. Would be a lot more convenient for people if they could keep their mushrooms for months and months on end. I mean, they are dried mushrooms, but you get the point. So the bioavailability and the nutrient level are just significantly higher if you deal with fresh products, and that's the way we think about the nutritional quality of the product, and and in addition to that, also how it fills into the gaps that people experience in their diets. We typically worry a lot about, are we getting enough protein? Are we not eating too much fat, and about the carbohydrates? But equally important are all the micronutrients and the vitamins that we get. And microalgae are among the most nutrient-dense foods out there. So once you add that, I'd like to say it is a natural multivitamin. It covers a lot of the nutritional needs that your body has, and makes you function just so much better.
Algae, the natural multivitamin. Love that. So we've got some actually really good questions in the chat that I want to kind of pull into the conversation. I'm going to try to kind of order them logically. So one of these is, what are some of the novel or interesting uses of these? We kind of hinted on ExxonMobil investing a lot of money into algae, trying to look at an alternative biofuel. And what are some of the things that you see? Andrew mentioned earlier some of the work that Paul Stamets did with mushrooms, using that for ecological cleanup. So what are some of the other alternative uses for the products that you entrepreneurs are creating?
Yeah, I can chime in quickly. So the bioremediation stuff is very cool. The Paul Stamets work was I would say fairly preliminary. I think that a lot of people put there's a lot of excitement about it, but the science needs to still be proven. But luckily, there are some amazing people trying to prove it, and Smallhold's helping out some of it. There's a project in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and a person named Dr. Danielle Stevenson, who's working on a giant bioremediation project throughout Los Angeles. And so they're using, our waste is essentially fully active mycelium and sawdust that's great compost, but we take it there, and then they're doing all of these experiments throughout Los Angeles and cleaning up lead and oil mainly, or the big oil spills, big pollutants that they're dealing with. But that is something really exciting. We're also seeing a lot of people use our compost as compost. That's really popular at our Texas facility. We have people lining up at the end of the week, essentially, and they fill their trucks with our compost, and then they go and do their own remediation projects. Right now it's free, so anyone in LA or Texas or New York should take advantage of it. I don't think we're planning on trying to make a huge revenue source from it, but there's some opportunity there. Smallhold, we didn't really have the capacity to support ingredients until relatively recently. We've been mainly selling fresh, whether it's from the on-site productions or our larger farms. So we sell packaged mushrooms inside grocery and some restaurants. But it wasn't until about 2 or 3 months ago that we could start taking meetings about people sourcing our products for ingredients. And a lot of people are very excited about it. The mushroom industry at large, usually, you can source buttons domestically, like button mushrooms, which we don't really want to grow. I don't know. We can have a whole other meeting about buttons, why not buttons, I guess, is the next panel. But a lot of mushrooms that you'd find in your other added value products. Usually they're from overseas, from China. And there's some amazing farms in China, but the average American consumer has a lot of concerns about Chinese products. There's also a pretty big, obviously like a lot of food miles and a climate footprint from shipping products from overseas. And so a lot of people are looking for domestic products, they're looking for organic products. We pay everyone a living wage, which I think is something that hopefully a lot of people care about. And so there's a lot of elements that I think are going to be more important for people creating, whether it's your Beyond Burger or your Lion's Mane coffee or any of these things. They're looking for ingredients that mean a lot more than just the product itself. And so a lot of those people are reaching out to Smallhold to supply that.
Awesome ingredients at a living wage. I know that one of my favorite things is I have a mushroom powder that I sprinkle my food when I want a little bit of that umami kick.
Sure, I do that.
I could maybe speak to some other potential use cases for the crop that we produce. So generally we focus on three areas of research: the genetics, the production systems, and then the processing, the extraction of the Rubisco. But on the genetics of the crop, there are all kinds of varieties of water lentils. And there's been some interesting research looking at a use case for sewage treatment, which sounds very different than food. But people have been using the crop as a pre-treater for sewage in some emerging markets because it grows so quickly and it extracts so much. That property, its ability to extract from it's a floating macrophyte, it floats on the top of water. That property is great for us in that, if we control our environment well, we can, it is very fast uptake and we can see a very fast feedback loop. We harvest on like a daily, 1 to 2 day basis. But those same properties can be used in other cases as well outside of food. So we don't want to merge those two necessarily, but it's cool to see the use cases elsewhere.
Thank you so much. We had a really good question about unit economics. Because these are organisms that function really differently than leafy greens, what is the kind of, point in which you can scale and the cost and unit economics kind of like start making a little bit more sense when you're like kind of hitting that commercial ramp?
Yeah, I can start. So how I always look at, there's different ways of looking at the math behind a leafy green operation, but especially when you're talking about indoor, like sole source lighting, so like no sunlight, a lot of it has to do with the amount of energy that goes in the light to help drive photosynthesis. And so it has to do with how much energy you put in to create how much edible product you can get out of it. And so that's why like short cycle crops, so like a microgreen that only takes 7 to 14 days to grow, the unit economics are great. The market is questionable, but like unit economics of microgreens are great. But then as you get to later like crops that take longer and longer, it becomes more difficult to make ends meet with that kind of facility until energy prices go down. And so that's why like a tomato is very tough to grow indoors. You're growing a lot of vegetative mass that no one's going to eat, and it comes out to these little fruits that you have to go and try to sell for a premium. Totally manageable if you do the right branding, and you like I didn't get to follow up with Jonas's point, but I think a lot of people in the space don't spend enough effort on creating a brand in a community, and I think that's one of the most important things that anyone can do if they're trying to create a consumer brand. Seems obvious when you say it out loud like that, but you'd be surprised how many people don't focus on it. But it becomes hard when you're trying to grow indoors, but then you're competing with outdoors. If everyone is growing indoors, then it would be a completely different kind of thing. Produce probably costs a lot more money, but it would be a lot, I think, simpler to justify some of these facilities. The problem is that you have productions like the lettuce production in Salinas in the Southwest United States, where it's very cheap. They have a lot of labor issues, like migrant labor and all sorts of crazy stuff are going on. There's a lot of problems with it, but it's very cheap. And so you have to compete with that while also having all these other elements with your facility. Anyway, when we're just to talk about mushrooms are all grown indoors generally. Like, sure, you can find wild mushrooms, but the playing field is a little bit more even in the mushroom space. Like, vast majority of commercial mushrooms are grown indoors. They're just grown in either lower tech or higher tech kind of operations. And we kind of lean into the higher tech sort of things. Additionally, mushrooms, they get all of their energy and their mass out of their substrate. And so while we do use climate control and we have to use a little bit of light, mushrooms like a little light, for example, but it's phototropic, not photosynthetic. And so it uses the light to signal it to grow. It doesn't need a certain amount of light to grow a certain amount of mass. And so you can be very energy, like you could be good with your energy if you're growing mushrooms. For example, like our carbon footprint is like 30% lower than like Beyond and Impossible and all those kinds of things. Like our water footprint is negligible. And all of that is because they're getting so much of their nutrition from this substrate. And so without going like into our margins or everything, I don't think I can do that on this call, but with mushrooms, it makes a lot more sense to grow indoors in a lot more kinds of places. I think leafy greens grown indoors make a lot of sense in certain locations that it doesn't make sense to grow outdoors. But obviously, like if you're in a situation where you're truly competing with outdoor leafy greens, then that's going to be more difficult than you probably want to deal with.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think that if we look at the positioning of leafy greens grown from indoor farms today, I mean, they're usually, the vast majority of them are the most expensive version of that product on the store shelves, especially when you look on a per gram basis. I think for us, we're still relatively small scale. And so our unit economics, our cost basis is high, but scales downward very quickly as we scale up. So I think the major drivers there are, first, economies of scale benefits that the incumbent industry has, but then also genetics research. If we look at protein crops like soy, we have 100 years of, really consolidated genetics research, but then beyond that, we have thousands of years of human cultivation that has, given us some preferential crops. In crops like water lentils, we're barely scratching the surface. So if you can prove an early use case and drive more research in that space, I mean, we can see from the genetics today that there's so much potential there. And once you start even getting halfway towards that potential, the cost basis goes down very significantly. So we see it's sort of a long-term bet on a crop that could far outpace the current unit economics of the industry, but would require more research to get there.
I think I could say there's a lot been said about it, and I think that all applies to our business as well. But I kind of want to put the spotlight on the other side of the equation of unit economics. It's like the question of, like, we covered how much it costs to produce, but then there's also the side of like, what kind of value do you actually provide to people? And I think too often people, especially when they get started with the operations, do not spend enough time thinking about the actual business model and how they actually want to present the product to the market, what kind of channels they want to play in. They think of, oh, I run an indoor farming company, and the only way of doing this is I gotta either work with a distributor or gotta go into retail, and that's the end of the story. When you start branching out, when you look into different types of crops, new channels become available. Type of crop that we grow, spirulina, has been traditionally a crop that's been very popular in online sales channels, so it made sense for us. Other farms mainly more into subscription models or search for other types of outlets. And depending on what you grow and who your customer is, you might be able to push the value that you provide by really having a significant amount of differentiation. Maybe instead of growing grocery store mushrooms, maybe the pathway is towards truffles. I know truffle cultivation is a whole different spiel, but suddenly you have a much higher value product. And like that's the way I think that I want to present this, is like, you may find a specific niche where you're able to charge significantly more until you're able to bring up your scale to a point where you can compete on a mass market level.
Exactly.
Awesome, Jonas. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Andrew, go ahead. You looked excited.
Oh, no. I think it's so important because, I mean, with agriculture, the question is always like, how are you cost competitive with like traditional ag, and totally understandable, because especially going into whatever the economic situation is in the coming years. But I think, again, like that is giving your product kind of a disservice, because you can position yourself in a way where you can sell it at a premium and not fight to be the bottom of the barrel. Because, like, especially as a young company, trying to fight for price is not the position you want to be in. You're going to spiral out, and you're not going to create a product that people like, and you're just it's going to be kind of painful, unless that's like always been your focus. Like, if that's the technology you want to build, totally understandable. But you have, like, there's a way where you can be sort of in between. Like, you can go like the full premium, like Oishi Berry and all of that, which is super cool branding exercise. The quality's good. I know they're probably listening. I like it. But there's somewhere where it doesn't have to be super premium, doesn't have to be the cheapest thing on the shelf, but you can kind of land somewhere in between. At least that's how Smallhold does it, and it definitely helps us with our brand, and the positioning that we're trying to be in. But I think that, too many people try to focus on the price rather than the value, or like the quality that you're bringing to the shelf.
All right, I'm going to do a lightning round, so just a real fast take on this. So for those of our audience members who are interested in potentially growing their own water lentils or algae, or getting into mushroom farming, advice that you would give them, like probably the same advice you'd have given your younger entrepreneurial self, and then some like just things to consider as far as like cost or overhyped equipment. Just let her rep. What's your like kind of top 2 to 3 pieces of advice? I know it's hard to condense it all.
I'll start with growing stuff. I think it's very important to grow the stuff and then to sell it, or at least to make sure you have customers for it, because you can spend decades developing technology for like a head of lettuce that then you realize that you might not have a product that people really want. And so making sure that the customers are there, or at least being convinced about the future of your customers. It's totally possible that the customer doesn't exist yet, but like do that thought rather than focusing too much just on the technology, because that's an expensive path to go down that you should think about before you go down it. I think the other thing that's helped Smallhold out a lot, it's like talk to people. There's too many issues with the indoor ag space. This is like one of the reasons why the Ag Collective started in the very beginning, was that we saw all of these operations starting to close their doors, be blocking with NDAs and all this kind of stuff. And I think half of that is because people are afraid to see that their technology isn't that cool, rather than like, because there's something really crazy behind those doors. And people just need to like let go of their ego, because a lot of time the indoor farmers aren't really competing with each other. It's more like you're trying to have a bigger, like more radical change in the food system. And so people need to communicate better. They need to talk. You can talk to other mushroom growers. You can talk to me if you want to grow mushrooms. We're very open about how to build these things. And I'm sure you can find those people, whether it's in the US or if you're doing hydroponics or mushrooms. Netherlands, a lot more people are a lot more open than they are here. And so you can definitely like reach out to people and get a lot of data. You don't have to spend too much money on it. It's just all about like finding the right people to give you the right information.
Andrew, thank you so much. Sorry for that little interruption. I use my water squirt gun to nail my dog when I'm on conference calls.
Cool.
I definitely agree, Andrew. On the customer side, speak to your customers, get to know them really well, find the community that's obsessed with what you're doing, and they'll probably help you identify different kind of use cases or markets as well. But I think one thing that some advice we had early on that's been really helpful is model your unit economics and track your assumptions, and then test and validate those assumptions. Because if you're trying to grow novel ingredients or crops or mushrooms or anything really, you might be dealing with a circumstance where there's not, shoulders of giants that you can just lean on. So model those assumptions, test them in reality, make sure you're building a profitable business. And if it's not profitable today, make sure you have continuity towards profitability, because that's what's going to give you continuity of capital to get there.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking off what everyone else already said here. I think touching back on actually what I said earlier as well, it's like, be creative around your business model. Like, you don't have to do the classic, I grow and then I sell in the retail. Nothing wrong with that. There's definitely a big opportunity there. But like, we have so many new emerging technology solutions. We have so many new channels. We have so many, like, a much more segmented market. Like food service is looking for new solutions. Chefs are looking for new solutions. So instead of going out there and be like, I just do what other people have done, but I think I can do it better, knock on every single part of your operations and ask yourself, is this a place where I can derive unique value for my customers? Can I partner with DoorDash and get all my produce out in like 10 minutes or whatever it is to create something that surprises your customer in a positive way, where you're like, this is a unique value that no one else is providing? Because there are plenty of people out there working in indoor farming and working in agriculture and working in food. You will need to find ways to differentiate yourselves. And while it was never easier to find ways, it is work. And I think not a lot of people ask themselves what kind of business model is the right fit for their location, their customers, their crop. So I encourage that.
You guys are echoing a lot of the sentiments of actually the failed farm panels yesterday. Is know your customers, do your market analysis, and more importantly, like, be okay with those like interim check-ins and trials. I think that's great advice for anybody who's looking to get into that. Now, I just want to give you guys like an opportunity. If there's anything we covered today that you're super hyped about, let's do that. Then we're going to roll into plugs and closing comments. If you in the audience have any more questions, now is the time to get them in right under the belt.
While the questions roll in, I can finally get to my like, what algae applications exist beyond what we do, because it's been burning under my fingernails. Yeah, algae is like super cool because it has so many different applications. There are people using algae to grow or to create self-healing concrete, to patch up concrete. There are people that create plastics, bioplastics from algae. You can buy literally running shoes with the cushioning of algae. Algae is used as a feedstock, and if you feed algae to cows, apparently the methane emissions from a cow go down by like 30-40%. Super fascinating. There are applications as fertilizers in dog food, as you can extract, I think it's pronounced heme, the iron taste from algae, and integrate that in fake meat products to create a more meaty flavor. You can create algae milks from the product. I've recently saw the first spirulina-based fake salmon. So there's so much out there that you can do with algae. The real question is, what do you want to create, and find the right algae that produces this kind of compound, and then you can create whatever you need to do. Well, cheerleader for algae here.
Yes, 3,000-year-old primordial soup algae if you're very lucky. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to drop your websites and LinkedIn's into the chat. And this would be a great time if you have like a kind of personal plug or a project that you want visibility on to share that with the audience.
I mean, we grow a lot of mushrooms. So if you go to, we're in about 500 grocery stores now across the country. And so any Whole Foods in New York or Mid-Atlantic, Texas, or California, and then a bunch of different grocery stores, you can find us on our website. And so like, eat more mushrooms, whether they're Smallhold or not. The other thing is, if you go to our website, we do send out a newsletter. It's a very fun newsletter. It's not about Smallhold really. It's about crazy mushroom stuff for people we interview. It's just tons of mushroom content. And so if you're at all into this kind of stuff, we also have a little section of indoor farming news too. And so other people get some props in the newsletter, but it's a lot of fun. We put a lot of work into it. So go to our website and sign up. And I think we have a new one coming out in a week or two. And so you can see what we're capable of with the newsletter.
Yeah, similar here. If you want to be exposed to algae, check out our website as well. As I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we are a D2C brand, so you can place orders on our website. We ship it to your door, at least when you live in the United States. I also want to plug in that late October, we're going to do a little road trip in upstate New York. We're going to be in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Geneva, Ithaca, Binghamton. If you happen to be around, make sure to stay tuned to our social media, to our LinkedIn. Well, my LinkedIn contacts are dropped. You'll certainly see that here. Reach out directly so we can meet up in person and discuss a little bit more what we have in mind about algae.
And we don't sell B2C, so I don't have anything to plug on that side, but we are based in London and are going to be many different conferences that are coming up over the course of the next few months in Europe. So if you're in Europe and interested in food systems, if you're stopping by London, would love to grab a coffee. And I guess if I could plug anything more broadly, I just say the future of food is an incredibly, incredibly important topic. And it's not getting the attention it deserves now, but it will at some point. And if I can push people in that direction, hopefully it'll become a big public topic before it's too late. So check out where your food comes from and what the future of food looks like. It's really, really important.
Love that plug. Melanie just dropped in the chat to thank the panelists for the kind of representing a whole bunch of different kingdoms today. We've got one last lightning round question, and then we're gonna wrap it up, which is, what is like one of your favorite dishes that features your product? I'm actually going to start. I do a Korean, normally what I would put on for like Korean barbecue, like pulled short rib tacos, but I actually do the same marinade on mushrooms and do like a mushroom taco with a cabbage and lime slaw. The lime helps kind of break down the toughness of the cabbage. It's really good with like an avocado QB mayonnaise topping.
That sounds great. I want that. I was going to say a lion's mane thing. But...
I will write a recipe for your newsletter.
Yeah, definitely. That would be amazing. Yeah, please share the recipe. For me, I mean, one of the more fun things that a lot of people are doing are these, there's a trick that you can do with the lion's mane mushroom where you take 2 cast iron, or if you're really fancy, you can have these little like cast iron weights, but 2 cast iron pans, get them really hot, and you can like, there's all these recipes. So if you look up like lion's mane steak, you'll find it. So you don't have to memorize what I'm telling you, but there's ways of squishing the lion's mane while it's cooking, and it caramelizes on the outside and it turns it into like a steak. It's really crazy tasting. And it gets really dense and it's very steak-like if you put the right seasoning on it. But it's very cool and I like it. And so that's my favorite at this point.
Yeah, for me, I may not have the exquisite culinary experience here, but my favorite use case for spirulina is the way I'm using it every single day, and that is in my morning smoothie. It's my ritual in the morning, like one of the few meals where I feel like I have actually full control over what I'm eating. So it's my little moment of zen in the morning where I'm like feeling like I'm treating my body, where I'm feeling like I'm giving the nutrition that I need, and where I can like, before the hustle and bustle of the day as a founder, as a CEO, in rather crazy times starts, I can sit at home and just take care of myself, and that feels really good.
Really cool. I really want to try that lion's mane recipe. That sounds amazing. So there is actually a fresh water lentil cookbook developed by some academic researchers. And to be honest, it's an acquired taste, but you can have it as a salad or a smoothie or in all kinds of different ways. And it's a great protein ingredient. We've just scheduled a bunch of food inclusion trials over the course of the next few months. And the one I'm most excited about coming up is a vegan cake using Rubisco instead of egg whites. So we will see. But that's what we're one of the things that we're trying in the months ahead.
We will have to find that water lentil recipe book. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sean. Go ahead. I cut you off.
I was going to say, I could probably dig it up and send it over to you, Shannon. I'll do that post call.
Thank you guys so much. You know, we're getting some thank yous from our audience for answering the questions today. Thank you so much for your time, and don't stay tuned. We're going to have another panel coming up soon. All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.